Our speaker today is Megan Owen. She develops combinatorial geometric and statistical methods and algorithms for analyzing non-Euclidean data, particularly tree-shaped data. Her work has applications to evolutionary biology and medical imaging. She will speak today on two problems on tree-based networks. Thank you, Megan. The floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for the invitation to speak. And I was mentioning earlier, but I think my talk might run slightly short. So please feel free to ask questions during it if you have any. So yeah, so I'm going to talk about two problems on tree-based networks, but these are actually, this is joint work. One sec, let me just figure out how to, sorry, there, okay. So this is joint work with Katherine St, who's at Hunter College, and then two cohorts of REU students. So the first problem is with the fall 2015 group of REU students we worked with. And then the second problem is with the fall 2017 group of REU students. And these were REUs, we ran them during the academic year. So they were for students anywhere in New York City, basically anyone or like surrounding area. So anyone who could get to Lehman College every Friday. And yeah, and then we just met every Friday during the fall, and then for a 2-week intensive in January. Okay. So I want to introduce the idea of phylogenetic networks. So you've probably seen a phylogenetic tree before, even if you don't know that they're called this, right? So if we have, say, some fish species and we have their DNA, and then we want to try and reconstruct how they evolved from some ancestral fish species over time. And so the tree is showing us, in this case, that these two fish are most closely related, and then this fish and then this fish, right? So it's showing the evolutionary history over time. And for a lot of mammals, like a tree is totally fine. This is what you would see if you go to like a natural history museum. But for things like bacteria, and also there's other, and it's not just bacteria, also say some plants, sometimes with some kind of animals, you don't actually want a tree because the evolutionary history is more complicated because you have things like bacteria eating other bacteria and absorbing their DNA into their own DNA, or you have hybridization, say with plants. And so in that case, you want to represent, you're going to represent your evolutionary history as a phylogenetic network. So it's no longer a tree. You can now have, well, sort of what looks like cycles, except you can restrict these to being directed acyclic graphs. Directed because this is time is going forward. And acyclic because you basically don't, like genetic material can't be transferred back in time. So you couldn't have a cycle of material transferring down and then going kind of like back in time somehow. So we can restrict ourselves to acyclic. And you'll notice that in this case here, so this is kind of the non-tree vertex. And it could represent something either like hybridization, so where two different species mate and their offspring are actually viable and maybe become a new species over time. Or this could also represent something called either lateral or horizontal gene transfer. And that would be, an example that would be a bacteria. So a bacteria in this lineage, maybe eating a bacteria over in this lineage, and it's incorporating some of its genetic material. So essentially, genetic material is not just passing from parent to child. It can be kind of passed across, like between lineages. And you'll notice that those still have trees in them. So this phylogenetic network, right, has this tree in it, and then it also has this tree in it. So another way to think of them is it's like a combination of trees that make them up. And then sometimes when people work with them, they'll put weights on these and they'll be like, well, this fish got like 80% of its DNA this way and then 20% that way. So actually, you might depict the population of humans, right? We have a small amount of Neanderthal DNA, so you could maybe even be using So I have a phylogenetic network to represent that. Okay. And then we need the two nodes, the two types of vertices are we have tree vertices. So they have in degree 1 and then out degrees either 2 or more. If it did have more, it would just mean that evolution happens so fast that we just can't tell which, if there was like 3 fish coming down from here, it would just mean it's probably not true that they all evolved instantaneously all into 3 different lineages all at once. It's more likely we just can't tell which two, like where the first division was and then where the second division was. And then the other thing we have is reticulation vertices. And they have an out degree 1, and then they can only have in degree 2. And in this talk, actually, I'm always going to assume, like, I think all my examples have out degree is equal to 2. So you can just think of the vertice, either we have vertices with in degree 1, out degree 2, or in degree 2, out degree 1. And then, of course, we have the root at the top with in degree 0, and then the leaves at the bottom, which are our species. So this was a question. So what you might be interested in is when your phylogenetic network is really just a tree with some extra edges versus something more complicated. So you're trying to biologists are interested in this because it's a way to try and measure like how complicated evolution was. Also too, if you do want to try and justify that you're mainly going to use trees, if you know there's kind of some base tree plus extra edges, you can maybe just go with the base tree most of the time and make your life easier. So the formal definition is a phylogenetic network is tree-based if it can be formed from a tree only by adding edges between the tree edges. So if this is my base tree, I can add an edge like this between the 2 tree edges. And I could, for example, also add an edge here. And the edges too, I see in this example, I've only got them going between the edges going to the leaves. But like I could have had an edge going from here over to D. But what's not allowed is I can't put an edge from a tree edge to one of my extra network edges. Or if I do, I would have to find a different base tree where this worked. So that's the basic idea, is you want to be able to take this phylogenetic network, draw a base tree in it, and then just have the extra edges be between the edges of that base tree. So not every network is tree-based. So here are some examples. So in this one, we can see that you can maybe have it going up here like this, but then we can't get, we're going to have a bunch, like all these edges here are not going to be part of our base tree. And so that's a problem because they're joining each other, is one example. And this one is also not tree-based. It's maybe slightly more confusing, but again, any base tree I try to draw, I always will end up with several edges that aren't covered by it attaching to each other. You can see if I maybe draw it in here and draw my base tree like this. And like this, I still kind of have these 2 nodes where I've got multiple edges attaching that aren't part of my base tree. And maybe I should just give an idea, also to the other reason people like to try and make categories of phylogenetic networks is because if you think of them as only being a directed acyclic graph, that's basically too unwieldy to work with. You can get some really wonky DAGs. So in phylogenetics, there's some other proposed categories of phylogenetic networks that try to mimic properties you want in evolution while being mathematically tractable. So, okay, so let's just talk about, so Francis and Steele, they weren't the first ones to suggest what a tree-based network was, but they kind of had this paper in 2017 that I think opened up the area of studying it. And they showed that you can check in polynomial time via an algorithm based on 2SAT if the network is tree-based or not. And so I'm just going to give you the basic idea just so you get a feel for this. So tree-based networks, there's sort of a lot of really interesting combinatorics going on. And there are still some open problems. So if you have a tree vertex, if your network is going to be tree-based, you know that you've got to either have this situation where the red is the base tree, right? Or you have to have this situation. Because this X, like, it can't, or I guess you could also have both. Sorry, I should have put that in. So I could also have both of them because it's a tree vertex. But you definitely need to have this edge here. So this edge here definitely needs to be part of your tree-based network. Because otherwise, if you don't have it, you don't have these two, and then you have a vertex that's like not part of your your base tree. And with the reticulation vertex, you can kind of make a similar argument that either you must have this situation or you must have this situation. Again, so you must have the down, the out arc, and then one of these two. And here it should have been, you can also have both of them. But with the reticulation vertex, you can't, because that would not be a tree if I had two incoming edges. So you can sort of see, I won't give exactly how they did the two-sat, but they're basically encoding these ideas that, for example, here I can only have one of these two. And they're able to set up an encoding of the arcs as the literals and encode it as a two-sat problem. And so you can just check if two-sat satisfied, which is polynomial time, to check if the network is tree-based. So they asked 3 questions in this paper in 2015. So they asked, on what trees can a given network be based? So not just, because their algorithm just says yes or no, it's based on some tree. And that was answered. They also asked, can you check in polynomial time if the network is based on a specific tree? And this is the first problem I'm going to talk about, which we answered in the negative. So it's NP hard. And then they asked, is there a network based on all possible trees? And that is true. Okay, so you can see that this first paper spawned kind of a lot of follow-up paper, and then there's still some more since these ones. So let me talk about this problem here first, which is in polynomial time. Can you check a polynomial time if a network is based on a specific tree? So the idea is we're given a tree. So we're given orderings of the leaves and the actual tree. We're given the network. And then we want to know, so to make our argument, we can see that A and C have to join up. And over here, I think, so A and C either could join at the root, but that would leave no room for B, or they could join up here. So actually, first I know I need all of these in my base tree. And then I can join up. Oh, and then sorry, C, the only way it can get to the root is to go up here. So I have those in my base tree. And then I can add A over. And then I could see that I can add B in. Okay, so if the example is fairly simple, you can maybe start to think, oh, there might be a polynomial time algorithm. But then at some point, we came up with examples that look like this. So essentially, the top of your network is the same. And then you just have this huge mess down here. And you have your leaves in some order. And in your tree, you also have a caterpillar. And your leaves, that's not a mess. And your leaves are in some other order. And essentially, it's like, can I is there like a way through this, like some untangling of this to get the leaves in this order over here? Okay, and once you start thinking, once you realize that this might be possible and is a valid instance, you start to think that maybe it's NP hard, which is the case. So the reduction is from 3-dimensional matching, which I'll just remind you what that is. So 3-dimensional matching is we have 3 different sets, all of the same size. So a set of X elements, Y elements, and Z elements. And then we also have these sets that have exactly one X, one Y, and one Z element in them. So here's one possibility, another possibility, a third possibility. And the question is, can I pick some of these SIs? Because obviously you would have more than this. Can I pick, so in this case, I have exactly, I have K, or sorry, I have 5 elements in each of these. So could I pick 5 of the SIs such that I can cover every element of the X, Y, and Zs exactly once? Okay, so that's the three-dimensional matching problem. It's NP hard. And we were able to rig our problem into this. So the idea is, again, the same idea that we have a tree, just like regular old caterpillar tree. Actually, I don't know if people call these caterpillar trees outside of phylogenetics, but that's what they're called in phylogenetics, when it's just a backbone and all the like legs coming off it. So we have a tree, and our ordering of vertices is for each of these x's in the set. So my x elements would be, sorry, so if back here I had, whoops, oh no, sorry, okay. So if back here I had 5, that would be my n. So this would be x1, x2, x3, x4, and x5. So what I'm going to have is for each of these xi's, I'm going to have a prime and a not prime. And then I would have a x2 prime, x2, and same with an xn prime, xn. And same with all the y. So I have a y1 prime and a y1, right? And a z1 and a z1 prime. And then I have some counter variables over here. I have I have n counters over here. Okay, and okay, yeah. And I guess I have k total leaves, I think. And then my network is, you'll notice each pair of these so the element and its prime are in the opposite order of the tree. And the counters are they're in reverse order, I believe. I'm not going to worry too much about the counters. They're just to make sure we get it, we choose the right number of SIs. And the idea is that, let me go back. The idea is that each of the gadgets is going to, so each of the gadgets is corresponding to an SI, and it will flip exactly one in the, if it's activated, it will flip exactly one in the X pairs, exactly one of the Y pairs, exactly one of the Z pairs to show that it's covering those elements. And then it will change the counter threads to count up, to essentially move them along by 1. And so with the gadgets, we were able to kind of do it. So if it hasn't been selected, you can see the tree can just, the base tree can just flow through it, and it doesn't change the ordering of the elements in it. And this is, you can see this is a tree-based network, right? Any edges that aren't covered are in between the edges we are covering. So this is maintaining the tree-based property. And then otherwise, it can flip. So if you just follow the X's, you can see this. So this one also maintains the tree-based property in that the dashed edges, which aren't covered, are always between solid colored edges, which are part of our base tree. And so you can see in this case, xi prime goes over to xi prime, sorry, but these are in the other order. And this xi goes over to xi here. So they've swapped places versus the previous gadget where xi prime just stays in the same place and xi stays in the same place. And the y's also swap. So yi goes over to on this side, and then yi prime goes over here. Whoops. And then the counters all move by 1. So if they were, so C1 would end up in front here. They're just rotating through by 1. And so this is how the reduction works. That basically you can only now, if you've got to flip all of the Xi's, Y's, and Zi's exactly once, and then you can only have your K number of counters, like, and then just to make sure, basically each flip is saying you're covering that element, and then your counter is just double checking that you've only picked the number of sets so that everything is covered once. So that's a reduction. And so because of that, so we've reduced from 3DM to showing that a specific tree, that a network is based on a specific tree. And so we've shown the problem is NP hard. So I'm going to go on to the next problem. So I don't know if anyone did have any questions they wanted to ask now.
I have a question, Megan.
Yeah.
The third problem that you listed on the previous problem page,
Yeah.
asking whether there is a network for any possible tree. Is that right? Is there a network based on all possible trees?
Here, is there a network based on all possible trees?
Yeah, that's sort of not clear to me what that means. I mean, certainly if you're given a tree, that tree is already a network by itself. So.
Yeah, so the question is, so say if you have 4 leaves, then there are 15 different phylogenetic trees you can put on them. So where, like,
I see. So all of this is assuming that the leaves are fixed. Right.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So you fix your leaves, and then so for the case of 4 leaves, there's 15 possible. We're restricting ourselves to phylogenetic trees. So binary ones, I think, too, actually. So you're assuming that each,
right.
As you go to each degree, splits in 2. And so the question is there a network that would be based on all 15?
Got it. Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Okay, so let's go on to the next one, which is, so then there was a follow-up paper by Francis Semple and Steele in 2018, and they started to look at this problem of like, okay, so if a network is not tree-based, how far is it from being tree-based? And again, right, because if there's, somehow it's only off by a little bit from being tree-based, maybe you could still pretend it's just tree-based and go from there. So Francis Semple and Steele proposed a bunch of ways that it could be tree-based. I've only listed one here. So one is like, how many leaves could you add to the network to make it tree-based? And they showed that computing that is polynomial time. And they had 2 other measures too that were kind of based sort of, that they actually showed were equivalent to this, that all 3 of them gave you the same distance measure and so. And then they had 2 open problems. So one we answer, and then the other I'll tell you at the end of the talk. And they asked, can the minimum number of network vertices not covered by a subtree be computed in polynomial time? So equivalently, what's the maximum covering subtree of it? And then which vertices are not, and then you would count how many vertices are not covered. So again, just to sort of give you an example, is if we have this network here, the solid lines over here is a maximum covering subtree. And you can see it's not tree-based because we have a bunch of vertices in the middle here that aren't covered by the maximum covering subtree. And so you can see actually it's off by, we're missing 4 of the vertices. And you can make some other kind of complicated problems that makes you think it might be NP hard. So let me just formally define it as a problem. So you have your leaf labeled network. And again, your network and the base tree, you're assuming they have the same leaves always. And so you want the minimum number of vertices not covered by some subtree n, where you consider all possible subtrees over it. So let me just tell you so I don't know if you thought at all about the dates, but this problem we had worked on in the fall of 2017 with our students. And we kind of, by the end of that fall, thought that it was probably NP hard because, so first of all, we had some examples that seemed pretty, it wasn't very clear how you would make an algorithm. They seemed kind of messy. They seemed like they had some aspects of what you would expect in an NP hard problem. And also too, so if you remember, I said that just determining if a network is tree-based could be done via 2SAT, which is polynomial. But max 2SAT is actually NP hard. And so we were kind of thinking, we couldn't exactly use the encoding that Francis and Steele had used for 2SAT, because that just didn't work to find the maximum numbers. But we thought that maybe we could somehow reduce from max 2SAT. so we tried this for actually quite a long time, and that was why we never published anything, because it turns out that's actually the wrong idea, and the problem is polynomial. And one of our students came back and looked at the problem again, and got us thinking more in the polynomial direction, and so we were able to come up with it. So it actually turns out the algorithm is very, you can find the covering subtree by a reduction to a minimum cost maximum flow problem. So the maximum flow problem, right, is there's capacities on edges and you're trying to get the most flow through your network. And then a minimum cost problem is you've just also got, besides capacities on your edges, you also have costs. And you're trying to get the flow that's maximum, but also as the cheapest cost. So, and those, I should say, there's a bunch, like this is a really widely studied area, minimum cost, maximum flow problems, as you might imagine. And so it's polynomial, there's a bunch of different algorithms. I'll talk a little bit more about that at the end. So yeah, so if this is the network over here, say, and I'm trying to figure out what the maximum subtree is, I'm going to I'm going to make it into my flow network. So the first thing I'm going to do is each of these vertexes here, I'm going to split them into an in and an out. And this is a pretty standard network flow trick, I think, for dealing with certain kinds of problems. And then I'm adding edges from my source S to all the vertices. Okay. And then I'm going to add a target T down at the bottom and connect it up to the out vertices of the leaves. So in this case, there were the 3 leaves, so I just connected up to them. Okay, so that's my flow network. And then so the capacities are all 1 for every edge. So this actually makes it a unit capacity flow network, which are widely studied. And then the cost is, so I want to minimize the number of, I want to maximize the number of vertices covered. Since I'm converting it to a minimum cost, if I make all these edges here from my in vertex to my, like, remember for all the vertices, I split them in 2. And so if I make those edges between the 2, the in vertex and the out vertex, all be -1. And I make so basically all these fuzzy purple edges are -1. And then all other edges are 0 for the cost. And so in that case, a minimum cost is going to be trying to cover as many of these edges as possible. And that's what we want for a maximum covering subtree. Okay, so this, I mean, there's some proofs in here, but it was a very short paper. And I think it should sort of be pretty, hopefully fairly obvious that this would seem like this is a reasonable thing to do. So then you find, now that you've set up your network, you run an algorithm to find the minimum cost maximum flow in it. So let's say this purple one here. And then you just have to convert it back to your covering subtree, but that's, yeah, okay, so this is what I said before, that because the costs, the only negative, everything's 0 except for where you have your vertices. And so essentially your minimum cost flow is going to pass through as many vertices as possible to give you the max cover. And you can see what we've done is the source. So you can't have a tree, right? Because you can't have these connecting up because everything has capacity 1. Any flow coming into a vertex can only leave through 1 vertex. But that's why we connected the source to all the incoming vertices. So you can see that, so we have like one path here, and then our source is connecting up to the start, have connected up to the start of this vertex and the start of this vertex. So essentially you're going to get, you can only get you can only get paths equal to your number of leaves. So you'll end up with, in this case, 3 paths. And then they're going to go up as high as possible, because if, for example, this edge here, if the source wasn't connecting to this vertex, but was instead maybe connecting down to this vertex, I could get a lower cost flow by also including this bit and this bit. So for the flows in the network, they're only going to be one arc away from another, from connecting up to another flow. And so I've got myself my covering tree. So again, right, we have a few proofs just to like formalize all these ideas I'm telling you, but there's really not much more beyond it, beyond like kind of what you can intuitively see here. So yeah, so one runtime, and this is definitely not the fastest, is if n's the number of vertices and m's the number of arcs, is if you do a Bellman-Ford approach to it. So some algorithms don't deal with negative costs, but Bellman-Ford could take care of it, and then that's got a runtime of n squared m. And we kind of left it that in the paper that, okay, it's polynomial, because we do not know a huge amount about max flow problems, honestly. But there are a bunch of other algorithms for min-cost max flow problems. So things like interior point methods and others. And then it turns out that actually min-cost max flow algorithms on unit capacity graphs are a current area of research with a whole bunch of papers just very recently. And it looks like they're going off interior point methods, I think. It was honestly a bit hard to get the runtimes from them because they're all kind of making incremental progress, but they're based off some, like somehow they were assuming you knew how they were formulating the runtime. It wasn't, because a lot of these are conference papers, so I think they're a bit reduced in space. Anyway, so it was not exactly completely clear to me what their final runtime is, but I think this is an active area of research, and I'm sure it's much better than the runtime here with the basic algorithm. But the main point is that it's polynomial. And if you really cared about it, you could look in and find the best algorithm and run that. So yeah, the other open problem that was still left by Francis, Semple, and Steele was, okay, so you have your phylogenetic network. It's not tree-based, so a maximum coverage subtree is going to be missing some nodes. And then the question is, how many different subtrees do you need? What's the minimum number of trees you need to cover all vertices of n? So maybe they could be covered, for example, with 2 trees, or maybe it's more complicated and you need more trees. So that's an open problem. And then I also wanted to talk about, so this is just one last thing. So just in case you're finding these trees look interesting, I just wanted to say there's some other interesting combinatorics in here. And honestly, there might be more open problems than the ones I've mentioned. I haven't read every single paper on this topic, so I think in great detail. So I think there might be other open areas. For example, I do know people have pushed into doing these for non-rooted networks. But just to sort of show you something else interesting in combinatorics, this was in the paper by Zhang, who was one of the people who showed that you could make a network that contained all possible trees on your set of leaves. So if you remember, right, there's the tree vertices that have the in degree 1 out degree 2, and then the reticulation vertices within degree 2 out degree 1. So you can think of all the tree vertices are in set T, all the reticulation vertices are in set R. And then you define a graph, then he defined a graph. So it's a bipartite graph. So one set of vertices are T, one set are R. And then you put an edge if there is an edge, oh, that should be a capital T here. But if there is an edge from the tree vertex to the reticulation vertex in your network, then you would put that edge between the 2 vertices in the graph. And it's tree-based if and only if this graph has a matching such that each reticulation is matched. So there's and there's some other formulations, there's some other matchings, a maximal paths and bipartite graphs you can rephrase these as. Jitten and Van Ursel gave a matching, characterized it using a matching in a different bipartite graph. And then Francis, Semple, and Steele have also given characterizations based on anti-chains. And that's actually, maybe, let me go back to this, because I do have the picture that kind of shows why anti-chains are a thing to look at, which is here. You can kind of see if I have 2 leaves And I have an anti-chain of 3 nodes here. There's kind of no way I'm going to be able to cover all 3 of those nodes with my tree bit with only 2 leaves down here. So that's sort of where anti-chains are coming in. So there are these other really interesting combinatorial tie-ins to tree-based networks. And there are also some tie-ins to other categories of phylogenetic networks that evolution, like mathematical biologists mathematical phylogeneticists are interested in. So yeah, so thank you. So this was funded, the REU obviously from NSF, and then also funding from Simons and my career NSF.